Elon Musk's Starlink project, aiming to provide global internet coverage, has sparked both excitement and concern.
This technology is going to connect the world in ways we never imagined.
Elon Musk's Starlink project.
And right now, as you read this, there's a company most people have never heard of that sits between your phone and almost everything you do online. It's not Apple. And it's not Google. And yes, Elon Musk helped build it. What if the real power in tech isn't in the apps you see, but in the pipes you never think about? And the company is called Starlink, but that's only half the story. And what most people don't know is that Starlink is quietly becoming the invisible backbone of global telecommunications, not just for rural internet users, but for the phones in your pocket, the emergency services that might save your life, and the military operations that shape geopolitics. And it launched in 2019 as SpaceX's satellite internet division, promising to connect the unconnected. By 2025, it operates over 6,000 satellites and serves more than 4 million customers across 100 countries. But here's what changed. In late 2024, and Starlink quietly began partnering with T-Mobile to offer satellite-to-service and turning every smartphone into a device. Fast forward to 2024. Starlink announced partnerships with multiple global telecom carriers, and not just T-Mobile, but also Rogers in Canada, Optus in Australia, and KDI in Japan. The goal: direct to smartphone satellite connectivity, no special hardware, and no new phone needed. Just an over-the-air software update, and suddenly your iPhone or Android could connect directly to a satellite 340 miles above your head. And in December 2024, the first live satellite-to-cell text messages were successfully sent during public beta tests across the United States, and the service is expected to roll out fully in 2025, starting with SMS, then voice, then low-bandwidth data. At first, it sounds like a convenience feature, and something for hikers and campers. But dig deeper, and you realize what's actually happening. And Starlink is building a parallel telecommunications network that doesn't rely on ground infrastructure. And because it's satellite-based, and it's nearly impossible to regulate the way traditional cell towers are. Let's look at the evidence card by card, because this story lives in technical filings and corporate partnerships and regulatory documents that most people never read. First, the satellite count. As of November 2024, SpaceX has launched over 6,000 Starlink satellites, with approximately 5,400 currently operational. The company has FCC authorization to deploy up to 12,000 satellites in its initial constellation, and with applications pending for an additional 30,000. No other company, public or private, operates anything close to this scale. For comparison, and all other active satellites combined number around 8,000. Second, the direct-to-cell capability. In August 2024, and T-Mobile and SpaceX jointly filed technical specifications with the FCC showing how their system works. And the satellites act as cell towers in space, using modified Starlink hardware to communicate with existing LTE and 5G phones on specific frequency bands. And the initial service operates in the PCS-G block spectrum, which T-Mobile owns. According to the filing, and each satellite can serve a ground area roughly the size of Rhode Island at any given moment. The system is designed for text messaging first, and because it requires the least bandwidth, voice calls and data come later, as the constellation grows denser. Third, the control structure. And Starlink operates as a wholly owned subsidiary of SpaceX, which means it's a private company with no public shareholders and limited disclosure requirements. And Musk serves as CEO and controlling shareholder of SpaceX, and with an estimated ownership stake exceeding 40% and voting control near 80% through special share classes. And there is no independent board governing Starlink's decisions about coverage pricing or service interruptions. And when Musk decided to limit Starlink access in certain Ukrainian territories in 2022, he didn't need anyone's permission. Fourth, the geopolitical entanglement. And Starlink terminals have been deployed not just in Ukraine, but also in conflict zones including Gaza, Sudan, and Yemen, and according to reports from various humanitarian organizations. In some cases, the terminals were provided directly by SpaceX. In others, and they were purchased through third-party distributors. But in every case, the service could theoretically be monitored, throttled, or shut off remotely. And a leaked SpaceX internal document from 2023 revealed that the company has geofencing capabilities that allow it to disable service in specific geographic areas down to and one that doesn't need to negotiate with local governments for permits to dig trenches or erect towers. And some economists argue this could force legacy providers to improve service or reduce costs. But the gaps in the story are significant, and we don't know how Starlink's data is handled. The company's privacy policy states that it collects location data, usage patterns, and device identifiers, but it doesn't specify how long this data is retained or who has access to it. Unlike traditional ISPs, which are subject to certain FCC transparency rules, and Starlink operates in a regulatory gray zone. It's technically a satellite service provider, not a telecommunications carrier, and which means it faces fewer disclosure requirements. We also don't know what happens if there's a conflict between Starlink's business interests and public safety. And in the Ukraine situation, Musk's decision to limit service in Crimea was reportedly made because he feared enabling a Ukrainian drone strike could escalate the war. And whether you agree with that reasoning or not, the fact remains one individual made a unilateral call with potential military consequences, and there's no framework for accountability in that scenario. Finally, there's the question of long-term sustainability, and Starlink satellites have a lifespan of about 5 years, after which they deorbit and burn up in the atmosphere. This means the company needs to launch roughly 1,000 new satellites every year just to maintain the current constellation. The environmental impact of this is debated, and some scientists warn about the accumulation of metallic particles in the upper atmosphere. Others argue the effect is negligible compared to natural meteor activity, and we don't have a definitive answer yet, because this scale of satellite deployment is unprecedented. For Maria, a nurse in rural Alaska, and Starlink was the difference between working from home during the pandemic and losing her job. Her village of 200 people had no cable, no DSL, and cell service that dropped every time it rained. Starlink gave her stable video calls with patients, access to medical databases, and a way to stay connected with her kids when they went to college in Anchorage. She pays $120 a month for the service, which is expensive, but it's the only option that works. For Ahmed, a journalist in Sudan, and Starlink became a lifeline when the 2023 civil war knocked out the country's internet infrastructure. He used a terminal smuggled across the border to file reports and coordinate with international news agencies and warn civilians about militia movements. The service likely saved lives, but it also made him a target, and authorities on both sides of the conflict tried to track Starlink signals, knowing they indicated the presence of journalists or activists. And for families in Maui after the 2023 wildfires, Starlink terminals distributed by relief organizations allowed them to contact loved ones and access government aid applications, and coordinate evacuations when the cell towers were still down. These weren't luxuries. They were necessities. And they only existed because one company had the infrastructure in place to deploy them quickly. But impact cuts both ways. In authoritarian countries, and the same technology that empowers activists also creates new avenues for surveillance. And if a government pressures Starlink to log and hand over data about who is using the service and where, the company faces a choice: comply and potentially endanger users, or refuse and risk being banned from the market. So far, Starlink has been banned in China, Russia, and North Korea, but operates in more than 100 other countries. And we don't yet know what data sharing agreements, if any, exist between Starlink and the governments where it operates. To understand why this matters, you need to think about infrastructure the way engineers do. Infrastructure isn't neutral. It has politics baked into its design. Consider the humble telephone pole. And in the early 20th century, telephone companies decided where to run lines and where not to. And those decisions shaped which communities got access to communication and which didn't. Decades later, we're still dealing with the consequences, and because infrastructure is sticky. Once it's built, it's hard to change. And once it's controlled by a single entity, it's even harder to dislodge. And Starlink is doing something similar, but in space. By building the largest satellite constellation in history before any meaningful regulatory framework exists, and the company is creating facts on the ground, or rather, in orbit. Once those satellites are up there, once millions of people depend on them, and it becomes very difficult to impose rules that might disrupt service. It's regulatory capture through infrastructure. Here's a simple metaphor. And imagine if one company owned every road in your city. They could decide which neighborhoods get maintained, which businesses get delivery access, and which routes are open during emergencies. You'd still have a car. You'd still have freedom to move, but your movement would be shaped entirely by someone else's priorities. That's what's happening with Starlink, and except the roads are invisible and most people don't even know they're using them. Legal experts point out another wrinkle. International law governing space, and specifically the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, treats space as a global commons. But the treaty was written with governments in mind, not private companies. And there's no provision for what happens when a corporation, not a country, controls orbital infrastructure. Some scholars argue we need a new treaty, and others say existing telecom regulations should be updated. But these processes move slowly, and Starlink moves fast. Let's ground ourselves in what we actually know. And Starlink is a private satellite network owned by SpaceX and controlled by Elon Musk. It operates over 6,000 satellites, serves millions of customers, and is now partnering with telecom companies to offer direct-to-smartphone connectivity. What we don't know is how decisions about service, data, and access are made behind closed doors. We don't know what safeguards exist, if any, against misuse. And we don't know what happens when a private company's interests conflict with public good. Here's what comes next. The satellite-to-cell rollout continues first time. Either it rises to the occasion, demonstrating responsible stewardship, or it fails in a way that triggers immediate government intervention. This scenario is less about probability and more about readiness, and we won't know which way it goes until it happens. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Infrastructure is power, and right now, a significant piece of the world's communication infrastructure is being built by a single private company with minimal oversight. And that doesn't make it inherently good or bad. It makes it consequential. The question isn't whether Starlink will succeed. It already has. And the question is what kind of entity it becomes. A public utility, a private monopoly, a regulated telecom, or something entirely new and a hybrid that defies easy categorization. If you want to understand the next layer of this story, watch our documentary on how private companies are building the new space race, which explores the regulatory vacuum in orbit and what it means for competition, safety, and access. The infrastructure being built right now will shape the next 50 years of communication. It's worth paying attention to who's building it.